Hey everyone, DisturbedShadow here, back to bring you the next review in my Avenged Sevenfold discography review. Today we're going to be talking about their fourth album, which is their self-titled album, simply entitled Avenged Sevenfold. So before we begin, I just want to say a few things about the album before I just start talking about the tracks and various stuff. So, coming off of City of Evil, they had that big sound change in their sound. They sort of continued on with that direction and changed things up a bit more again with this album, which is much more experimental than anything they've done in the past and anything they've done after this album. It's just a really unique album. They tried all these different things on it, and it kind of got mixed reviews because they were either trying to do too much or I don't know. I personally enjoy this album. I don't think it's as good as some of their other albums. It's definitely not their best album, but it's still a pretty solid album. And I enjoy that they tried to do some different things here to keep things interesting. As I mentioned before, I like that Avenged Sevenfold never makes the same album twice, and they really try to push themselves to try different things each time. So let's jump in and talk about the diversity of the self-titled album. So I'll start off with the opening track, Critical Acclaim, which is my personal favorite off the album. It's just a perfect intro song. It starts off with this like organ, and then it builds up into this really epic harmonized lead guitar bit before it just gets really heavy. It's probably the heaviest song on the album. It's got this really heavy, groovy riff that just keeps going throughout the whole thing, and there's these heavy in-your-face vocals. And M. Shadow throws in all these different vocal styles that he does. He brings back some of the screams, mostly for just not really lyrics, but in between, they'll throw in a scream here and there, which is interesting. And the Rev also does some backing vocals on this track, throwing in some screams here and there as well. And there's just so much great alternation between the more melodic style singing and the heavy shouting and screaming laced throughout this entire album. And then what I like is that in the chorus, the Rev takes the lead vocals and he gets to do some lead vocals himself, and just has a very unique voice that blends in well with M. Shadow's voice, and it just has a great sound to it. And then in the after each chorus, there's this sort of spoken word shouting kind of bit where they sort of go on a bit of a political rant. And it's kind of interesting that they do that, because this is not really something that they did before. They don't really talk about politics a lot, and they don't really do like those heavy shouting type of moments, or they hadn't really with this new style, and it sort of blends in really nicely. And there's just some great guitar work the whole song, and then towards the end there's this great alternating lead bits and harmonized bits on the solo, and just comes together for a great sound. And it's just a really great way to start off this album. There's just so much cool stuff happening, whether it's on the guitars or the drums or the lyrics and the vocals. It just all comes together for a really nice way to start this album off heavy, and it's just a really awesome song. Track number 2 is Almost Easy, which is one of the first singles released off the album that received like radio play and stuff like that. It's a much more simplistic pullback song than Critical Acclaim. It's very simple with its guitar riffs, but where this song really shines is in the drums. There's just all these crazy drum lines. Like, I remember watching the making of documentary for this album that sort of talked about how the Rev sort of came up with this really simple guitar riff, and Synyster Gates actually didn't want to play it at first because he's used to doing much more technical things. He's like, this is like too simplistic. But then the Rev laid down this insane drum line, and they're like, okay, we need to make this song, because it just works really nicely with the pulled back simplistic guitar and this batshit insane stuff happening on the drums, and it comes together really nicely. And there's some great bits of piano laced into the beginnings and parts of the solo, and there's a really awesome melodic solo in the middle of the song that keep things interesting. And what I notice about this track is that the guitar often takes a backseat where the bass is turned up a lot louder in the verse and in the chorus than the guitar, so you can really hear what Johnny Christ is doing on the bass. It's just really heavy bass tones, and it just sounds great. And it's cool that they sort of put the bass into the forefront and pull the guitars back to take sort of a back seat. Track number 3, Scream. This song just has really awesome groovy guitar riffs throughout the whole thing, and it's just pulled back and simplistic sort of groove to this song. It's a lot more slowed down than some of the other songs, and it just has this really nice beat and a nice groove to it, like I said before. And that persists throughout the whole song. And there's some really cool bass moments on the song as well, where Johnny Christ sort of shines a bit more than he did on some of the stuff on his previous appearances with the band. Track number 4, Afterlife, which is where the album sort of starts to get more experimental, where they sort of bring in a lot of like orchestral elements. Like they have a full orchestra playing along with them for parts of the song, and it blends in really nicely with the guitar work. And this song has a really crazy melodic dual lead part at the beginning, right after the symphonic intro, and then the song has a lot of really melodic pop hooks throughout the whole song, where it's got a lot more of a pop rocky almost kind of feel to it, which is something really different for Avenged Sevenfold, and they hadn't really done that before. And it really shows off that they're willing to try different things, whether or not it's always received well by fans. But this song is generally a really good song. I've seen them perform it live 2 different times, and just really gets the crowd into it. And it's just a great song, and it's just a fantastic, shreddy, melodic solo that Synyster Gates pulls off. It's one of the best solos they've done, in my opinion. It just fits in so perfectly with what the song is trying to do. And like I said on Critical Acclaim, there's great moments where M Shadow's and the Rev's voices blend nicely together. And it just comes together for a really amazing song, even though it's a lot more poppy than what you might expect from this band. But it's still a pretty solid song. Track number 5 is another sort of experimental song where it sort of starts off with like this bluesy, almost country-like feel to it at the beginning with acoustic guitars. There's a very bluesy style of playing before it brings in the heavy rock guitar riffs, and then there's just a really great solo in this song as well. And this song is another one that really shows off M Shadow's more melodic style of singing, and there's just great vocal harmonies throughout the whole song, and it's a pretty solid track all the way through, even though it does try to do some different songs or different things. Track number 6, Unbound, The Wild Ride, which has many moments especially in the verses, where they bring back the guitar and they don't really have it, and they have this really cool, melodic, happy, upbeat piano bit. And then there's just really great melodic guitar playing. And then towards the end, they actually bring in a full choir, which is interesting. It's like, almost feels like a gospel choir in a way. It's just kind of an interesting thing they do. And at the end, it really slows down. The guitars get really simplistic, and they drop the bass down to like almost like a heartbeat. And they have a few children singing. It's just sort of an interesting thing that they did there, where they sort of have this interesting vocal progression from just M Shadows to M Shadows with the choir, then just the choir, and then having this group of kids sing. It's sort of an interesting thing they did. This is not really the best song on the album, but there's a lot of great, interesting things happening on the song to keep things interesting. Brompton Cocktail is a song that blends a lot of orchestral moments into the music itself. That's track number 7. I forgot to mention that. What I really like about the songs is this fantastic blend of orchestral instruments with this cool effect on them, like sort of paired up with the guitars to bring up an interesting sound. And then this is another song just like Almost Easy, where the bass really shines, and the bass is turned up so freaking loud on this song, and it sounds so good. And it really shows that Johnny Christ is doing all these cool, interesting things. He's not just following along with the guitars. Actually, on this song, it seems like the guitars are almost following along with what he's doing, so he's sort of taking the lead along with the orchestral bits to keep things interesting. And I just really like the way this song comes together. Track number 8, Lost, which is a very melodic song. There's so many melodic harmonized bits throughout the whole song. There's so many powerful emotional guitar bits throughout the whole song. It just has a lot of power behind it. What's interesting about the song on the vocals, there's a lot of moments where they use this sort of, it's not really an auto-tune, I'm not sure what it is. I remember them showing it in the documentary, but I don't really remember exactly what it was. But it puts this really interesting effect on the voice, and it almost sounds poppy. They did it on the Rev's backing vocals on the choruses, and then in the final chorus they apply it to M Shadow's voice when he's doing this really gritty singing. And it just has this really interesting and strange sounding effect on his voice, combined with that grit that he has in his voice, and it brings up this interesting sound to it. Now, the song is sort of a lot more poppy than some of the other songs, but it's still a really solid track, and I really enjoy this song. That's just another thing where they're trying to be more experimental with their sound. Track number 9, which is probably one of their most famous songs, just because of how interesting and weird and hilarious it is. Track number 9, A Little Piece of Heaven. This is just the most ridiculous, fucked up, gloriously fucked up song that they've made. It's just ridiculous. It's just this crazy thing. They have all these like brass and string instruments thrown in, and the guitars aren't really there that much. It's mostly just drums and these orchestral bits and lots of interesting piano stuff. And just the lyrics are the most ridiculous things ever. And if you don't know, this song basically tells the story, or it's the most happy, upbeat, melodic song about necrophilia you will ever find. It's such a fucked up topic, but it's just so funny the way they sing about it. It's just hilarious. So basically, this is the story about this guy, and he's paranoid that his girlfriend is going to leave him because he's happy the way things are. So he kills her, and then he has his way with her dead body. And then she gets mad and comes back and repossesses her dead body and then kills him. And then he realizes he needs to make up for his mistake so that he comes back to repossess his own body. And then eventually they basically have a zombie wedding and then go on a killing spree. That's from what I can get out of the song. It's just such a weird and fucked up thing, and just all the lyrics in the song are just hilarious. Like, I don't even know how to describe how ridiculous it is. It's just such a hilarious song, and it's really fun. The first time I saw them live, they played it as an encore, and it's just interesting to see the crowd get so into such a fucked up song. It's just a really fun moment, and it's definitely worth checking out, even though it's kind of a weird song, but it's just such a hilarious song that it's worth checking out. And finally, track number 10, Dear God, which is basically a country song, which normally I despise country. I don't like the genre. It's mostly because of the vocal delivery with that twangy, annoying southern drawl sort of sound. And it's not even just like a southern accent. It's just this country singer style that there's a certain twang to the voice that really puts me off. I don't mind the instrumentation so much, but when Avenged Sevenfold does it, they stick with M. Shadow's typical vocal style, and it blends really nicely with the acoustic guitars and then all the typical country style instruments, like they bring in pedal steel guitar and a banjo and stuff like that. And it works really nicely. It's a really different and interesting song, and it's an interesting way to end the album. There's a lot of cool parts at the end where there's sort of Synyster Gates and the guy who did the pedal steel guitar trading off solos, and it just sounds interesting. It's just a really cool song. It's really different from anything they've done before, and it's interesting that they tried to dip into country music a little bit, even though that's not typically a genre that a lot of metalheads enjoy. But they pulled it off nicely, and it's a cool little thing they did. Anyway, that's my track by track. Let's jump in and talk about the stuff the band members are doing. We'll start off with, of course, Synyster Gates and Zacky Vengeance on the guitar, as usual. These guys are doing a lot of cool harmonized lead bits throughout the whole album. Like, there's just all these insane bits on Critical Acclaim where they're just trading off guitar playing or harmonized together. And there's stuff like Lost, where they just throw in all these harmonized bits consistently throughout the whole song. These cool sort of melodic moments in Almost Easy and in Unbound the Wild Ride, where it really shows off the lead playing. And then on the rhythm side of things, there's a lot of really great groovy riffs throughout the whole album. Like, there's all these like heavy chuggy riffs like on Critical Acclaim, or the more simplistic riffs on Almost Easy, or just the groove to the riffs in Scream. There's just stuff like that throughout the whole album that it really keeps things interesting on the rhythm guitars, and they're doing a great job there. Johnny Christ on the bass. This is some of his best bass work so far from the band, compared to the last two albums he appeared on. The bass was there, but he was mostly just following along with the guitars, even though he's turned up pretty loud and he's easily hearable in the mix. But on this album, there's so many moments where the bass sort of shines. It's turned up louder than the guitars, and you can really hear what he's doing. Like I said, that happens on Almost Easy and on Brompton Cocktail, where his bass playing really stands out, and he's doing a lot of cool, interesting things. And then there's stuff like on Scream, where he has these cool, groovy bass moments that blend in nicely with what the guitars are doing. And then the Rev on the drums. This is some of his best drumming, in my opinion. There's just all these crazy drum lines throughout the whole album, where there's this fast, almost marching beat to Critical Acclaim, where he's then layering all these cool fills in between the different drum parts that he's doing there. And then Almost Easy, where everything sort of takes a back seat, and it's more pulled back and simplistic, and then the drums really shine because it's showing off all this crazy fast playing that he can do. It just comes together so nicely. And then there's Afterlife, where he alternates between the more simplistic pulled back stuff and the more crazy all over the kit kind of stuff. And he sort of knows when to switch between things to get the most out of the drums and perfectly pair it with what everyone else is doing. So he's doing a fantastic job here on his final full appearance with the band, and he's doing an amazing job. And then he has his own backing vocals and lead vocals that he does on songs like Afterlife and Critical Acclaim, where you can really hear his voice that blends nicely with M. Shadow's voice. Which brings us, of course, to M. Shadow's on lead vocals. This guy has fantastic range, and he can do all these cool things, whether it's the more heavy, gruff sort of shouting and screaming that he does on Critical Acclaim, or the more soaring anthemic style singing that he does on Almost Easy and Afterlife. And then there's the more sort of poppy type of singing that he does on songs like Afterlife and Gunslinger and Lost, where it really does this more melodic sort of style with all these like catchy hooks and stuff like that. So he's really got a lot of range, and he's doing all these cool and interesting things. So he's doing an awesome job on the vocals. And it's cool that they brought back some of the more heavier style stuff for the song Critical Acclaim. And little bits and pieces of some of the other songs. It comes together really nicely. So that wraps up my discussion of the band members. Now, final thoughts on the album. It's a very experimental album. They tried all these different things, whether it's bringing in all these orchestral elements, or doing a more poppy type of song, or a song like A Little Piece of Heaven, where it's just this really fucked up lyrical content, but then it's like all this crazy like jazzy and bluesy and kind of like all over the musical spectrum of stuff they throw into the mix on that song. It's just such a diverse catalog of stuff happening just on that song and on the whole album itself. And finally, they had like country elements in Gunslinger and Dear God, which is something that is sort of not really done a lot in metal, of blending in country elements into the music. So it's just cool stuff like that. That's very experimental. But some of the songs just aren't as solid as songs on some of their other albums. So a few complaints I would have is that because it's so experimental, it's not as focused and sort of trying to do too much in some places, but that doesn't detract too much from it. It's just, if you're listening to it as a whole album, it might not hold up as well as some of their other albums. And then the songwriting isn't always as strong as it could be, even though it's still pretty solid. It doesn't hold up as well as some of their other albums. I'd say, aside from, it's probably their weakest album aside from Sounding the Seventh Trumpet, which was their debut album, which, as I mentioned in my review of that album, it had some weaknesses and stuff like that. And because it's just their starting point, they had a lot of room to grow. So I sort of put that down at the bottom. And then this one is just above that. They're both still good albums, but they're just not as good as their later stuff. Anyway, that wraps up my review, and very soon we'll be jumping into the review of the follow-up to this album, which is Nightmare. But until then, be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next review. See ya.